How the USSR shot down a Korean passenger plane. What killed 269 people? On September 1, 1983, a Boeing 747 passenger plane flying from New York, USA, with refueling in Anchorage, Alaska, USA to Seoul, the capital of South Korea, will be shot down by a Soviet Su-15 fighter due to crossing the USSR border for more than 500 kilometers. In this terrible tragedy, 269 people will die, everyone who was on board. There is a version that it was a U.S. plan, thanks to which the Americans will have to track the location of radars on the territory of the USSR. All passengers will be removed from the flight in Alaska. But is it true? Let's figure it out. The beginning of the flight. On August 31st at 23:11 in New York, the Boeing of Korean Airlines rises into the sky, from where it begins its journey of 12,000 kilometers to the capital of South Korea, Seoul. About halfway through the flight, the plane will have to make a technical landing for refueling at the Anchorage airport in Alaska. Strange delay at Anchorage airport. After landing in Anchorage in the dead of night at 3 o'clock local time, the plane had to be refueled, after which it would continue its flight. But Boeing is delayed at the airport for an extra 40 minutes. What's so strange about that? You may ask, but the fact is that there is an opinion in society that the delay was due to the disembarkation of all passengers of the plane, which was deliberately sent to the territory of the USSR so that the American satellite could detect satellites that guard the territories of the Far East. It is assumed that all the passengers of the Boeing left it in Alaska, where they will be issued new passports with new names to hide the intentions of the United States. Whether this is true or not is still unknown, and it is unlikely that it will ever become known, but let's believe in the best. Let me remind you, it's 1983. A new crazy round of the Cold War between the two powers has begun. Everyone didn't have enough nerves to put up with it anyway. So the US president is also heating up the situation to the limit with his March words that the USSR is an evil empire. Even more gasoline is added to the fire by the conditional bombing on the island of Zalini in the area of the Little Coral Ridge, which was organized by the US government. This will be a painful blow to the reputation of Soviet air defense systems. The USSR at one time constantly pursues and lands intruder planes that cross the border of the Soviet Union. The plane continues its flight to Seoul, but instead of the usual trajectory, it goes north of the prescribed route, where it literally meets with an American RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft, which, as the Soviet side will say later, was so close to Boeing that they literally merged into one point on the radar. After their meeting, the Korean Boeing begins to go deep into the USSR, and the American intelligence officer continues his journey along a route close to the international route. Here one of the reasons for the tragedy arises. The American reconnaissance plane was very similar in outline to an ordinary civilian aircraft, so the USSR command considered that it was an American, not a Korean, who was moving to the border of the Union. The first interception. At 4:51 in the morning, a dot appears on the radar that moves straight to the border of the USSR. The plane will fly over the territory of Kamchatka, where there are many military secret bases, flights over which are strictly prohibited. The Su-15 fighters of the 865th Fighter Aviation Regiment are alerted from Yelizovo Airfield to intercept, but they do not have time to take any measures, because the Korean Boeing will soon enter the airspace of the Sea of Okhotsk, where the USSR has no right to take any measures against the violator. At this point, the plane went off course by more than 250 kilometers. The plane was heading towards Sakhalin. Attack on Boeing. Approaching Sakhalin, the Boeing was spotted on the radar of the Pianoka radar. On alert at 17:54. A Su-15 fighter was lifted into the sky from the duty link of the Seoul airfield. 18:02 Korean Boeing crosses the border of the Soviet Union again and continues to fly inland, deviating from the flight plan by 500 kilometers. The pilot of the Su-15, Lieutenant Colonel of the USSR Air Force Gennady Nikolaevich Osipovich, fired a warning fire past the liner, but this gesture was not noticed by the pilots of the aircraft, since the shots were made by armor-piercing shells, not tracers which leave a trail behind them, because the latter were simply not in the ammunition. Separately, Gennady Nikolaevich noted that he could not determine the ownership of the aircraft, since he saw only a dark silhouette in front of him, which was very similar to an American intelligence officer. Also, he notes that although the warning shots fired were invisible to the crew of the liner, but the presence of the fighter was known, because after the shots, the Korean Boeing sharply reduced its speed to 400 Kelvin m/h, which was perceived as an attempt to evade interception. After negotiations between the pilot and the command, an order was announced that the plane should be shot down immediately, since it is identified as a reconnaissance aircraft. At 6:24, the Su-15 Ray enters the target and fires 2 missiles at it, which hit the tail stabilizer and the left engine. At 6:36, the plane will crash into the Lapao Strait, crashing into the water. All 269 people on board will die. Effects: the Soviet media will tell about this incident only on September 2nd. On the night of August 31st to September 1st, an unidentified aircraft from the Pacific Ocean entered the airspace over the Kamchatka Peninsula. Then he violated the USSR's airspace over Sakhalin Island for the second time. At the same time, the plane was flying without aeronautical lights. He did not respond to requests and did not contact the radio traffic control service. The air defense fighters raised towards the intruder aircraft tried to assist in taking it to the nearest airfield. However, the intruder aircraft did not react to the signals and warnings of Soviet fighters and continued flying towards the Sea of Japan Telegraph Agency of the Soviet Union TASS. Numerous protests against the USSR began in the USA and South Korea, where people burned Soviet flags and shouted slogans expressing everything they thought about the situation. At an emergency meeting, U.S. President Ronald Reagan will call what happened a crime against all humanity that will never be forgotten. On September 9th, the Ministry of Defense will hold a press conference for foreign politicians and journalists, where Nikolai Agarkov, with a pointer in his hands, will personally prove to everyone that the invasion of Soviet airspace was deliberate and was clearly synchronized with the movement of the American spy satellite Faraday, as evidenced by the evidence from the Space Tracking Center. Nikolai Agarkov literally proved that in fact Boeing was a reconnaissance aircraft. It has been irrefutably proven that the invasion of a South Korean airline aircraft into Soviet space was a deliberate, carefully planned intelligence operation. It was operated from certain centers in the United States and Japan. The civilian aircraft for her was chosen deliberately, without regard, and possibly counting on human sacrifice. Hence all the grave consequences of this extraordinary incident, as it is called in the Western press. Naturally, all responsibility falls on its organizers. Nikolai Agarkov. Speech from the press conference. In the end, it all came down to the fact that Western experts believed that what happened was the mistake of an inexperienced crew. But this is nothing more than nonsense. The fact is that the plane was controlled by 2 pilots with 10,000 and 9,000 flight hours and a flight engineer with 5,000 flight hours. The Boeing crew was extremely experienced, so the Americans' opinion is nothing more than an excuse for what happened. The Soviet side clearly believes that this was an exclusively intelligence operation. All parties to the conflict were waiting for the moment when the plane's black boxes would be found. In the shortest possible time, Soviet divers lift black boxes from the bottom, but the information contained in them is frozen under the secret label for 10 years. When Boris Yeltsin comes to power, the black boxes will be handed over to South Korea. As it turned out, the transcripts of the black boxes did not give any grounds to recover compensation from the already Russian side. The information from the black boxes proves that when setting up the inertial navigation system of the aircraft, a mistake was made due to which the plane went off course. But this only highlights the inexperience of the crew, which, in fact, was absurd. Investigation of the event showed that, most likely, The flight engineer initially entered the wrong coordinates in Anchorage. Instead of 149, he entered 139 degrees west longitude, which in the computer system shifted the starting point of the lineup by 482 kilometers. It all fits together. The investigation was closed. Almost 40 years have passed since the accident, but every year more and more new facts appear that call into question the official cause of the tragedy. It is unknown how much more time will pass before humanity learns the whole truth about what happened in the sky over Sakhalin on September 1, 1983. I hope my article was interesting to you. I will be glad of any comments. Rate the article with a like or dislike, and subscribe to the channel to be the first to see new articles on the channel. See you in the following stories.